There's something no one has really laid out for you before. Every individual or company that has handed Meghan Markle substantial money, and we're talking serious high-level industry cash, has eventually done one of three things: cut ties with her, publicly criticized her, or quietly disappeared from the conversation altogether. And when you place those exits side by side on a timeline, a pattern starts to emerge that's incredibly difficult to dismiss as coincidence. But here's the detail almost nobody mentions. The real story isn't who left, it's the sequence in which they left. Because there was one figure in Hollywood whose sole responsibility was making sure negative Meghan Markle stories never saw the light of day. A human barrier built from influence, connections, and phone calls that editors actually returned. The moment that person stepped away, the entire structure began to crack. The Variety article detailing Netflix tensions? It appeared the very week after his departure. The financial downturn? It began that same month. The shield disappeared and the floodgates opened. Put those two facts together. And by the time we reach the internal HR complaint, a document filed in October 2018 by Meghan's own communications secretary, you'll understand why the palace kept the conclusions hidden, why those findings have never been publicly released, and why the individual who filed the complaint now works for Prince William. Think about that for a second. This isn't celebrity gossip. It's a forensic breakdown. We're going through every departure, every contract that quietly faded away, and every allegation in the exact order they unfolded. And we're going to identify the one constant that appears every single time. Everything she becomes involved with seems to unravel. I think every creative person behind her, every financial backer behind her, understands the risk. She's become too toxic to touch. And no, spoiler alert, it isn't Harry. So why is this coming up now? In March 2026, investigative royal biographer Tom Bower released Betrayal, Power, Deceit, and the Fight for the Future of the Royal Family. And I know what you're thinking. Another royal biography, another cycle of headlines, another week of commentary. But Bower isn't a gossip columnist recycling palace whispers. This is the same man who exposed Robert Maxwell's pension fraud, the same journalist who challenged Gordon Brown's carefully crafted political image while Brown was still serving in office, the same author who dismantled Richard Branson's public persona using documented evidence and verified sources. His standard has always been clear. As Bower himself put it, "I have very good lawyers. More importantly, I make sure what I write is true." His 2022 book Revenge was reportedly built on information from 80 separate sources. 80. So when his 2026 follow-up arrived containing claims detailed enough and potentially damaging enough that the Sussex team felt compelled to release a formal public response, their reaction was to label it a deranged conspiracy. Let's pause on that. When someone publishes sourced, verifiable information and the official response is simply deranged conspiracy, that's not really a denial. A genuine denial points to specifics. It says the date is wrong, the document doesn't exist, the quote is inaccurate. Instead, the statement focused on the fact that Bower had never personally met them, which, incidentally, is true of many respected investigative biographers. Bower never met Robert Maxwell either. That didn't make the evidence any less valid. The argument doesn't hold up. So what exactly is in this book that prompted such a public reaction? I'm grateful to them, actually, because they pushed the book to #1 on Amazon. And secondly, I'm not surprised. For them, any criticism is poisonous and damaging, particularly when it comes from me. But I can assure you the book is thoroughly sourced and true. That's the point. One example stands out. At a 2025 Invictus Games wheelchair basketball event, Harry's signature charity project and arguably the foundation of his post-royal identity, Bower reports that only 43 paying spectators attended. 43. Meanwhile, approximately 100 additional people were allegedly brought in by organizers and positioned around Harry and Meghan for photographs. The issue isn't merely that the brand is struggling, it's that the image may be carefully staged. And that's only the beginning. Revelation #1. The Invisible Shield. In April 2023, Meghan Markle signed with William Morris Endeavor, one of the most influential talent agencies in Hollywood. The agency belongs to Ari Emanuel, the powerhouse executive who represents names like Mark Wahlberg, Dwayne Johnson, and, this part matters, Oprah Winfrey. This wasn't viewed as an ordinary representation deal. According to multiple industry insiders, WME's most valuable role wasn't securing projects. It was serving as a protective wall against damaging press. When Ari Emanuel is backing you, negative stories have a harder time reaching publication. Editors hesitate. Newsrooms make decisions differently. The protection itself becomes the product. That was the shield. Then things changed. Around Thanksgiving of 2023, Meghan reportedly became frustrated by what she viewed as a lack of attention from the agency during the holiday period. She later requested a meeting in January 2024 and allegedly arrived expecting what sources described as decks and plans, a detailed roadmap for her future. What happened next was confirmed by multiple insiders. According to those accounts, Ari Emanuel had reached his limit. Whether she's genuinely content or deeply unhappy, whether she understands the reality waiting for her in the years ahead, one thing seems increasingly clear. The appeal isn't there anymore. Many people appear exhausted by the endless cycle. Another jam launch, another speech, another carefully staged Instagram photo. What once felt significant now risks becoming little more than an annoyance, fading into irrelevance. A second independent source put it even more bluntly. WME is absolutely not working on Meghan's personal business. Now here's where things get interesting. Publicly, WME denied it. The Sussex camp denied it as well. Right through March 2026, both parties continued presenting the relationship as active and healthy. Officially, she was still represented. Unofficially, there were reportedly no active deals and no meaningful meetings after January 2024. But one number reveals the entire story. A Hollywood insider stated privately, "There is no chance the Variety article covering Meghan's fallout with Netflix would have been published if WME was still actively protecting her." Think about the timeline. The shield disappeared in January 2024. The wave of negative coverage arrived almost immediately afterward. The Netflix reports, the collapse surrounding As Ever, the continuing staff departures. Every major negative headline surfaced during that same period when the protection was allegedly gone. That's not random. That's a pattern. But even that isn't the earliest chapter in this story. To find that, we have to go back to 2018 and to people Meghan once considered close friends. Revelation number 2, the Beckham operation. Harry first met David Beckham in 2012. By 2018, the friendship appeared solid. The Beckhams attended the royal wedding. Victoria Beckham reportedly helped with decorating Frogmore Cottage. This wasn't a casual connection. These were two of the most famous people on earth standing firmly in Meghan and Harry's corner. Then came a surprising detail documented by Tom Bower in House of Beckham. During the 2018 Invictus Games, the same year as the wedding and the Frogmore renovations, Meghan allegedly issued a specific instruction. Photographs featuring Harry alongside David Beckham were not permitted. According to multiple accounts, David was confused by the decision. He reportedly didn't discover until later that the restriction had originated with Meghan herself. Bower summarized the situation directly. She did not want any competition in the media from Beckham, and especially not from his wife, Victoria. Take a moment to process that. The Beckhams were invited to the wedding. Victoria contributed to the home's design. Yet the possibility of David Beckham sharing media attention with Harry was apparently considered a problem. Interesting. Then matters escalated further. According to reports, Meghan confronted David Beckham and suggested that Victoria had been leaking stories about her to the press. Sources described the conversation as tense. David Beckham, by several accounts, was furious. Royal commentator Kinsey Schofield later offered a different explanation. According to her, the source of the leaks wasn't Victoria Beckham at all. It was allegedly a salon employee known for sharing information. Not Victoria. Never Victoria. The accusation may have been incorrect. The friendship, however, suffered the consequences anyway. Fast forward to today. David Beckham has spoken publicly about Prince William. Whenever the Prince of Wales sends me a message and asks me to do something, the answer is always yes. That doesn't sound like neutrality, That sounds like someone who reached a conclusion. But while a false accusation against a friend can damage a relationship, something else in this file carries far greater weight. A formal internal document, one written by an insider years earlier. Revelation number 3, the buried document, October 2018. Jason Knopf was serving as Meghan's communications secretary. Not a reporter, not a critic, not an outsider. This was someone trusted within the inner circle. In fact, Harry reportedly asked Knopf to assist Meghan with drafting the well-known private letter sent to her estranged father. By every available measure, he was considered a loyal insider. Then, just 2 months after that letter, Knopf sent a formal email to Simon Case, who was serving as Prince William's private secretary at the time. Palace HR was copied into the correspondence. The contents were serious. In Knopf's own words, "I am very concerned that the Duchess was able to bully 2 PAs out of the household in the past year." He continued, "The Duchess seems intent on always having someone in her sights. She is bullying Y and seeking to undermine her confidence." Then came another line. "We have had report after report from people who have witnessed unacceptable behavior towards Y." And finally, the sentence that changes everything. "I questioned if the household policy on bullying and harassment applies to principals." Read that carefully. He wasn't simply describing behavior. He was asking whether the rules themselves applied to her. That's a very different question. It doesn't read like a complaint from a disgruntled employee. It reads like someone documenting concerns he believed were already understood internally. Now compare that with Meghan's public response, issued through a spokesperson in March 2021, nearly 3 years later. The Duchess is saddened by this latest attack on her character, particularly as someone who has been the target of bullying herself. Notice what happened there. An official HR complaint submitted by her own communications secretary was reframed as part of a broader attack against someone who had personally experienced bullying. The narrative shifted once again. At this stage, the story seems to reinvent itself whenever necessary. And the results of Buckingham Palace's internal investigation? Still confidential, still unreleased. The public may never learn exactly what conclusions were reached. But there are several facts that remain undisputed. Jason Knopf filed the complaint. Reports indicate Harry urged him not to continue with it. A month later, Knopf left his role, and shortly afterward, he went to work for Prince William. The insider everyone trusted the most ultimately became the strongest witness against the narrative. And if you think that's the most damaging piece of evidence in this entire story, hold that thought. Because the next revelation involves a man who once sat on a Zoom call with Harry, a story he still hasn't publicly told, and the numbers that explain why he used the word he did. Revelation number 4, the grifter verdict. In 2020, Harry and Meghan signed a reported $20 million agreement with Spotify. 3 years. One major promise. The idea was simple. Podcasts highlighting diverse perspectives and meaningful stories from a wide range of voices. What was ultimately delivered? One holiday special, one podcast series, 13 episodes. Then, nothing. June 16th, 2023. The partnership officially ended. And on that exact day, Bill Simmons, the head of podcast innovation and monetization at Spotify and the founder who sold The Ringer to the company for $196 million, made a comment that instantly became headline news. The fucking grifters. Then he added something even more interesting. That's the podcast we should have launched with them. I've got to get drunk one night and tell the story of the Zoom I had with Harry while trying to help him develop a podcast idea. It's one of my favorite stories. Pause there for a moment. He's not throwing out a random insult. He's referring to a specific meeting, a specific Zoom call, a specific conversation involving Harry and a podcast concept. More importantly, he's hinting at a story so revealing or so unbelievable that years later he still hasn't publicly shared it. Notice what he says. He'd need to be drunk before telling it. That isn't the language of mild frustration. That's the language of someone who experienced something memorable and is carefully choosing when or whether to reveal the details. Somewhere, that story still exists. and it remains untold. Meanwhile, the Netflix partnership followed an eerily similar pattern. The reported $100 million agreement. The documentary series generated enormous attention, largely because it focused on criticism of the royal family. Then the follow-up projects. Projects that, according to multiple industry assessments, failed to create the same level of impact. Netflix later invested in Meghan's lifestyle venture. Eventually, Netflix stepped away. The broader production arrangement was reportedly reduced to a first-look deal during the summer of 2025. By July 2025, the agreement expired without renewal. 2 seasons of With Love, Meghan. No third season was announced. The pattern repeats itself. Secure a major contract, deliver less than expected. Exit quietly, move on to the next opportunity. The equation remains remarkably consistent. Revelation number 5, the 43 spectators. We started with the Invictus attendance figure. Now let's return to it. In March 2025, Harry resigned from Sentabele, the African charity he co-founded to support children affected by HIV. He didn't leave alone. The charity's co-founder, chief executive, and the entire board of trustees also stepped down. According to reports, Harry had not visited the organization for 4 years before appearing in October 2024. One visit after a 4-year absence. An attempt to remove the chairperson reportedly followed. The effort failed. Resignation came next. 4 years away, 1 appearance, an immediate struggle for control, an immediate setback, then an exit. Now shift to the 2025 Invictus Games in Vancouver, Harry's flagship event. The project is most closely associated with his public identity. According to Tom Bauer, one wheelchair basketball match attracted just 43 paying spectators. 43. Reports further claim that organizers brought in roughly 100 additional individuals and positioned them around Harry and Meghan for photographs. Think carefully about what that implies. This is a man who chose to leave one of the most powerful institutions on Earth, a royal system backed by centuries of infrastructure, global recognition, diplomatic networks, established influence. The goal was independence. The goal was building something new. Yet the attendance at his signature event reportedly required active management to create the visual appearance of larger public support. At that point, the issue isn't simply a struggling brand. It's a brand being maintained through optics, a brand relying on photographs to project strength, a brand being kept alive through image management. But before we continue discussing contracts, audience figures, and corporate relationships, step back for a moment. Because underneath every failed partnership and every executive departure is a deeply personal story. And that story belongs to a woman who has never publicly discussed it. According to those close to her, she still can't. Her name is Jessica Mulroney, not a business associate, not a celebrity connection, not a strategic alliance, a real friend, a friendship that began years earlier in Toronto, long before royal titles, Netflix deals, or global scrutiny entered the picture. Jessica reportedly introduced Meghan to influential social circles in Canada. She helped style her wardrobe. She was someone trusted with the private conversations that never appeared in interviews, the late-night discussions, the personal struggles, the unfiltered moments nobody else saw. Then came May 2018. The royal wedding was watched by millions around the world. Jessica's children weren't simply invited. They served as page boys and bridesmaids. And that matters, because that's not the kind of role you hand out for networking purposes. You don't place someone's children at the center of your wedding because it's strategically useful. That level of inclusion reflects genuine trust. It's one of the most personal honors you can offer another family on one of the most important days of your life. Then, just 2 years later, everything changed. In June 2020, Jessica Mulroney became caught up in a social media controversy. She was accused of displaying white privilege during a dispute with a lifestyle influencer. The consequences arrived quickly. Television opportunities disappeared. Professional relationships unraveled. Her public reputation took a severe hit. She was facing one of the most difficult periods of her life, and Meghan reportedly cut off contact completely, immediately. Now, some people will naturally want to give the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps the friendship had already weakened. Perhaps distance had played a role. Perhaps both women had simply grown apart. Those possibilities exist. But look closely at the timing. June 2020. The Black Lives Matter movement was dominating global conversations. Meghan was actively reshaping her public identity in America. Issues of race and social justice were becoming central to her brand. The transition was happening in real time, and suddenly her closest friend had become linked to a controversy involving race. Jessica Mulroney wasn't merely a personal complication anymore. She had become a public relations problem. From a branding perspective, she had become expendable. A source close to Jessica later described what the years that followed looked like for her. She was dragged through the mud in 2020 and has struggled emotionally ever since, forced to sit on the sidelines while false stories circulated in the media, unable to respond. Unable to respond. And that's the crucial detail, because Jessica Mulroney, the woman who spent years behind closed doors, who was trusted with private conversations, personal confidences, and moments never intended for public consumption, has remained completely silent. According to sources, Meghan is very aware of that silence, and equally aware of what could happen if it ever ended. Jessica has the receipts. One insider claims publishers have reportedly offered seven-figure deals for a memoir. Think about that. The woman whose children stood beside Meghan at the altar. The woman trusted enough to be woven into the most intimate parts of the royal wedding. The woman who was there before the fame, before the titles, before the headlines. Remove the moment her presence became inconvenient. That's not simply a friendship ending. That's a business decision. Now let's talk about the actual cost of all this, because we're well beyond embarrassment at this point. We're talking about structural breakdown. Let's start with the trademark issue. In September 2024, the United States Patent and Trademark Office reportedly rejected Meghan's attempt to trademark American Riviera Orchard. Why? Because the name referenced Montecito, a geographic location, and geographic locations generally cannot be trademarked in that manner. Stop and think about that. The lifestyle brand was being positioned around products such as jams, teas, honey, wine, baking mixes, and decorative food items. Yet the brand name itself wasn't legally defensible. The February 2025 transition to As Ever wasn't some creative reimagining. It looked far more like a legal necessity packaged as a rebrand. The problem existed from the beginning. The foundation itself was flawed. Now watch the Netflix sequence carefully because, once again, the order matters. WME effectively exits the picture. January 2024. The protective barrier disappears. March 2026. Variety publishes reports discussing tensions involving Netflix. At roughly the same time, Netflix reportedly withdraws from its equity position in As Ever. The production arrangement, once reported as worth $100 million, had already been quietly reduced to a first-look deal during the summer of 2025. The agreement expires. No renewal. 2 seasons of a lifestyle series. No third season announcement. No major rollout. Just silence. And throughout that period, Netflix representatives continued insisting that suggestions of a deteriorating relationship were inaccurate, right up until the moment the relationship appeared publicly and financially diminished. Then there are the staffing numbers, 18 senior departures since 2018. At a certain point, that stops looking like ordinary turnover. Professionals who study organizations recognize it for what it is: a pattern. Chief of Staff Josh Kettler departed after only 3 months in 2024. His explanation? There were aspects of the role he reportedly wasn't comfortable with. 3 months. For context, a Chief of Staff position typically lasts 3 to 5 years. Then came another sequence. Chief Communications Officer Meredith Maines resigned on December 26, 2025. 3 days later, on December 29, 2025, Archewell Executive Director James Holt also stepped down. 3 days apart, end of the year, the 2 most senior figures responsible for communications and organizational leadership leaving almost simultaneously. Royal photographer Helena Chard offered a blunt interpretation. She argued that Maines was an experienced communications professional, likely seeking to protect her own reputation from what she described as potentially damaging and unpredictable behavior associated with the Sussex operation. Then she added something even more revealing. A communication strategy only functions when everyone follows it. Read that carefully. The implication isn't that the strategy itself failed. The implication is that somebody wasn't following it, that professionals hired to guide the brand were being overruled by the person they had been hired to advise, that communications experts were losing internal battles they should have been winning, that major decisions were being made elsewhere. And here's the larger issue. Former Palace employees reportedly coined the phrase the Sussex Survivors Club. Originally, it was said partly as a joke. Partly. The term was used to describe what some staff members felt after working closely with the couple. Today, it hardly sounds like a joke at all. The list of people associated with that label continues to grow. So what's the final conclusion? The argument presented here is not that Meghan Markle is the victim of an aggressive British press, nor that she is the victim of a racist institution, nor that she was rejected by a royal family unwilling to accept her. The argument is something different. It's that she has repeatedly moved through allies, supporters, and advocates in a remarkably consistent pattern. Every one of them begins as a supporter. Every one of them enters the relationship enthusiastically. And many eventually leave after experiencing something they rarely describe publicly. The Beckhams, the Clooneys, Oprah, former members of the Suits cast. Even Gina Torres eventually remarked, "We don't have her number, we just don't." Not presented as bitterness, not offered as criticism, simply stated as fact. We don't have her number. Then there is Elton John, one of the most loyal figures in British celebrity circles, a man whose connection to Harry was rooted in his friendship with Princess Diana. Reports suggest even he has attempted to keep interaction with Meghan to a minimum. Then add the names: Bill Simmons, Ari Emanuel, Netflix executives, Spotify, 19 staff members and counting, and finally, one anonymous source who had a front-row seat to much of the story summed it up in a single sentence. From what I've seen, the people who remain most loyal are usually those who benefit directly from the relationship. Everyone else eventually falls out with them. And then there's Harry, a man who walked away from an institution that had survived for centuries. A man who published a memoir detailing deeply personal family conflicts. A man who publicly discussed his brother's appearance and his family's private struggles. Today, he is increasingly seen attending events alone, polo matches alone, book launches alone, charity functions where only dozens reportedly purchased tickets while additional attendees were brought in to fill the frame. Whatever else may be true, that image doesn't resemble the triumphant independent future that was originally promised. He's not living the life he imagined. He's living with the consequences of a strategy that may not have been entirely his own. And when you look across every piece of evidence we've covered, the HR complaint he reportedly urged his secretary not to submit, the Beckham friendship that appears to have been managed without his full awareness, the Netflix partnership that was deteriorating even while public statements insisted everything was fine, a different possibility emerges. Harry may actually be the last person in this story to fully grasp what has been unfolding around him. Consider Frogmore Cottage. It wasn't merely a residence, it represented something much more important. It was the final physical reminder that regardless of how many interviews they gave, how many documentaries they produced, or how many public attacks they launched against the institution, they remained connected to the very system that created much of their commercial value. Then King Charles removed that connection, and with it, the last tangible link to the institution that made the entire project possible. They left in search of something greater, a new identity, a new empire, a new future. They spent 6 years trying to build it. And yet the most brutally honest summary of what that effort became may have come from a podcast microphone on a Friday afternoon in June 2023. A man who had signed a reported $20 million deal with them, a man who sat across from them on Zoom calls, a man who observed the operation from the inside, and when the partnership ended, he chose a single word: grifters. Not anonymously, not off the record, not whispered through unnamed sources, on the record, publicly, at full volume. But the word itself isn't the most interesting part. The most interesting part is what came next. Because Bill Simmons didn't just criticize them, he hinted at a story. A very specific story. A story about one particular Zoom call, one conversation, one podcast pitch presented by Harry. A story he has repeatedly described as one of the best stories he possesses, and years later he still hasn't told her. That story exists, somewhere, waiting. I've gone through every document tied to this timeline, every resignation, every public denial, every accusation, every friendship that collapsed, every contract that quietly expired without fanfare. And the more you line them up, the more that untold Zoom call starts to feel like the missing piece. Whatever Harry proposed, whatever was said in that meeting, whatever Bill Simmons witnessed firsthand, whatever it revealed about how they viewed fame, influence, business, and opportunity, it may be the one detail that explains the entire pattern. So after everything we've covered, every revelation, every timeline, every contradiction, I'm left with one question I genuinely can't answer. What exactly did Harry say on that call?